What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Here we are with another reaction. In this one, we have the greatest things England has done for you. And yes, we're proud. Before we dive into it, if you guys happen to enjoy, please don't forget to smash that subscribe button, give the video a thumbs up, and let's see what all greatness England has brought upon the world.
The greatest people on earth. Cue God Save the Queen.
These rustics are so inept. Nearly takes the honor out of victory. Nearly.
Our England, the land of kings, queens, and the people who invented civilization as you know it. We gave you law, science, literature, and a language so good, you all decided to speak it. We built an empire so vast, even the sun refused to clock out. Without us, you'd have no Shakespeare, no Newton, no Tolkien, no tea, and absolutely no clue how to organise a queue. And yet, despite all this undeniable greatness, some people still try to pretend we're not the best thing to ever happen to the world. To them we say, you're welcome.
To them we say, you're welcome. Oh my
The Crusades, one of history's most misrepresented events. If you listen to modern academics, you'd think the English and their European neighbours simply woke up one day, grabbed their swords, and decided to pillage the Middle East for fun. What they never mention is that the Crusades were not unprovoked. They were a response. For over 400 years, Islamic armies had been expanding relentlessly, swallowing up North Africa, Spain, and much of the Byzantine Empire. Christian lands fell one after another, with their populations forced to convert, pay heavy taxes, or worse. Jerusalem, the holiest city in Christendom, had been under Muslim rule since 637 AD, and Christian pilgrims were regularly robbed, kidnapped, or murdered. So, in 1095, Pope Urban II finally had enough. He called for a crusade, a counter-attack, and Europe answered the call. As historian Thomas F. Madden put it, the Crusades were in every way a defensive war. They were a direct response to Muslim aggression. While the French led the first few Crusades as inefficiently as possible, it wasn't long before England got involved.
That's why the French led the first few Crusades as inefficiently as possible.
Before England got involved. And when we did it properly. No one did it better than King Richard the Lionheart. Richard wasn't just a king, he was a force of nature. A man who spent barely 6 months of his reign in England because he was too busy crushing armies abroad. During the Third Crusade, 1189 to 1192, he faced off against Saladin, one of the greatest Muslim generals in history.
Dang.
At the Battle of Arsuf, Richard personally led a cavalry charge so devastating that it sent Saladin's forces running. Even when outnumbered, Richard simply refused to lose. He was so effective that Saladin began to admire him, and when Richard fell ill, Saladin sent him ice and fruit, because nothing says I respect you like a medieval fruit basket.
Like a medieval fruit basket. Nah, that's crazy to get admiration from your enemies, bro. Like, to be that, I guess, powerful in a sense that you get admiration from your enemies is like wild. Like, that's cool, but I feel like I need to educate myself more on the Crusades because I don't know enough about them. So I need to learn more about the Crusades and figure out what exactly was going on.
Wasn't just a warrior, he was a master diplomat. At one point, while negotiating peace, he casually suggested to Saladin's brother, "Why don't I just marry your sister and we call it a truce?" When swords didn't work, Richard was happy to settle things with a royal wedding. But the Crusades weren't just about fighting, they reshaped Europe. Crusaders brought back medicine, science, philosophy, and engineering, sparking the Renaissance. Trade exploded, linking Europe to Silk Road goods, exotic spices, and new technologies. Warfare itself evolved as European armies adopted advanced siege tactics, cavalry formations, and new battlefield strategies. Of course, modern critics love to moan about Crusader brutality, as if medieval warfare was some polite tea party before the Christians showed up. The reality?
That's a good
Every
point.
major civilization was fighting, conquering, and expanding.
I mean, that is a fact. Like, you hear so many bad things about the Crusades, and I hate the loss of life in general. I believe life is so precious, life is so valuable. To take it on grand stages, or in so many numbers, I hate it. I understand that war is necessary. I understand that it's always going to be around. But I don't like it. I don't have to like it. I can understand it, but I don't have to like it. But yeah, people like to talk about the Crusades and how savage they were, I guess, in a sense. But everybody was doing that. Like, everybody was trying to build an empire. Everybody was trying to expand. I won't say everybody. There were a lot of people trying to build empires and expand who just didn't have the capabilities, and I guess the Crusaders had the capabilities. So
the Muslim armies had been doing the same for centuries, and they weren't exactly known for playing nice either. Saladin massacred prisoners of war, just as Richard did when he executed 3,000 Muslim captives at Acre after Saladin refused to honour a peace deal. And if you want real brutality, look at the Mongols, who around the same time flattened entire cities, executed millions, and wiped civilizations off the map. Compared to them, the Crusaders were practically charitable missionaries. Historian Rodney Stark summed it up best. The Crusaders were not the unprovoked aggressors. Muslim invaders had been attacking Christian lands for centuries. Let's get this straight. The Crusades weren't some wild European invasion. They were a response to centuries of Islamic conquest. King Richard the Lionheart was an absolute legend, and the Crusades expanded trade, shaped Europe, and helped spark the Renaissance. And if anyone's still upset about them, it's been 900 years. Maybe it's time to move on. Cheers, me old cocker. The founding of Australia, or how England sent its criminals on holiday and accidentally created a nation. In 1788,
England sent its criminals on holiday and accidentally created a nation.
England looked at its overflowing prisons, sighed deeply, and decided, right, let's send them somewhere far away. And thus Australia was born, not through grand conquest nor noble settlement, but by shipping off convicts to the other side of the world and hoping for the best. The First Fleet, under Captain Arthur Phillip, arrived in Botany Bay, carrying a wonderful selection of thieves, forgers, and petty criminals, or, as they would later be called, Australians. It was a journey of brutal conditions, dysentery, and possibly the worst travel experience in history. Yet against all odds, they survived, built a colony, and somehow turned a prison camp into one of the most successful nations on Earth. Historian Robert Hughes, in his book The Fatal Shore, described it as a society born out of the sheer resilience of the unwanted.
I love the way he put that. A society born out of the sheer resilience of the unwanted. Yeah, I like the way that.
Of course, it wasn't all sunshine and kangaroos. The treatment of Aboriginal people remains a dark chapter, and life for early settlers was harsh, unforgiving, and occasionally involved wrestling giant spiders. But what started as an accidental experiment in exile evolved into a country of unstoppable determination, resourcefulness, and a talent for making everything sound like a question. So while Australians today like to joke about their convict past, they should also remember, without England's habit of exporting its criminals, there would be no Australia. You're welcome. America, the land of the free, home of the brave, and a country that never misses an opportunity to shout,
1776 will commence again if you try to take our firearms,
as if it was the year.
Oh Lord, I love this video.
Civilization began. But here's the awkward truth. America was, for all intents and purposes, an English project. Now yes, the Spanish technically landed first, wandering into Florida and parts of the Southwest before deciding that conquistador in Latin America was far more profitable. But they didn't exactly build the United States, did they? No, that job fell to the English, who arrived in 1607 at Jamestown and then again in 1620 on the Mayflower, bringing English laws, customs, and most importantly, the ability to form a proper queue. At first, it wasn't exactly a thriving success. The Jamestown
Nah.
settlers nearly starved to death because they spent more time arguing about leadership than actually planting crops. Meanwhile, the Pilgrims, those miserable Puritans who fled England because they found the Church of England too much fun, stumbled into
Too much
Massachusetts
fun.
and proceeded to have an absolutely grim time. Half of them died in the first winter, which probably explains why they were so thankful the next year. But despite the hardships, the
Bro, whoever made this video, I just throw it in like absolutely hilarious one-liners in there, bro. I absolutely appreciate learning about history, but when I can learn and be entertained in the same breath, it makes it that much better.
the English stubbornness kicked in. They built farms, towns, and eventually a society that looked suspiciously like England, only with worse weather and a lot more wooden houses. Who landed there? The English. Who built the first successful colonies? The English. Who established the legal system, language, and institutions? The English. By the 1700s, English North America had transformed into a thriving set of colonies filled with hard-working farmers, grumpy merchants, and people who still considered tea an essential part of daily life. It was here that American culture really began to take shape, and spoiler alert, it was mostly just English culture with a bit of local flavour. The legal system, English common law, the economy, English trade networks, the class system, still very English, rich landowners at the top, poor labourers at the bottom, everyone else somewhere in between.
It's like the situation where the master teaches the student, and then at some point the student surpasses the master. It almost feels like what the U.S. is. But I mean, I just you look at the United States of America, and then you look at the history of England, and you definitely see the influence that England has had on the United States. I think, like he said, he basically, I mean, they built the foundation of the United States. So at one point the U.S. just said, we appreciate you for helping us form, for giving us common law, for doing all these things for us. But now we want to be independent. Now we want to govern and rule ourselves. And England was like, I don't really like that. And so they fought a little bit. England was like, yeah, I guess, like, if y'all want to be that independent, go ahead and be independent. Like, we got a whole empire to be worried about. We ain't sweating y'all, so y'all do y'all, be independent, and we gonna worry about what we got to worry about. But we ain't got time to keep fighting y'all. Seems like kind of win.
After the great breakup of 1776, America couldn't help but keep copying England. The founding fathers, those so-called revolutionaries, didn't exactly reinvent the wheel. Instead, they took centuries of English political thought, added a few dramatic speeches, and called it a republic. Historian Daniel Hannan summed it up best. The American Revolution was less a rebellion against England than a demand to be ruled in a more English way. And yet, despite all this, Americans love to act as if they sprang fully formed from the ground in 1776, completely ignoring the centuries of English governance, law, and culture that shaped their country.
That's a good point.
Let's also not forget that after all the dramatic speeches, declarations, and flag waving, America immediately went and copied England's entire system, from common law to individual rights, and even kept English as their language. Because, let's be honest, what were they going to do? Speak French? So the next time an American bangs on about how they heroically threw off the shackles of English rule, just remind them, without England there would be no America. You're still English, facts, whether you like it or not.
I guess, would there be England without Rome? I don't know. I feel like you could just go all the way down the line and say that. And would there be this without them? Would there be them without them? Would there be them? You could just like keep going down the line until you get to the beginning of time, the first civilization, which I don't know what it was, but yeah. But I do agree. Yeah, I mean there would be no U.S. without England. That's facts. But like I said, you can go down the line and say that about so many.
England's role in ending the slave trade. And yes, we paid for it too.
I do got to give a big shout out to England's role in ending the slave trade, bro. Big shout out to y'all. Your boy is sitting here free. Got all the rights that anybody else got in this country. In England were the Crusaders against slavery. They were the ones who not only fought against slavery in their own country, but fought against slavery fought against slavery with the rest of the world as well. Like, so again, shout out to England. I appreciate you. I'm sitting here a free man, and I'm thankful.
Slavery, one of humanity's oldest, ugliest, and most universal institutions. But if you listen to certain people today, you'd think England invented it over afternoon tea. The reality, everyone has been enslaved at some point. The Romans enslaved the Celts, the Vikings enslaved the English, and the Barbary pirates raided English and Irish coasts for centuries, dragging over 1 million white Europeans into slavery. The Ottomans forced Christian boys into their armies, while African kingdoms sold their own people into the global slave trade. And yet when slavery is discussed today, the Anglo-American alliance always gets the blame. England was also the first nation to put an end to it. Enter William Wilberforce, a man who fought for decades to abolish the trade despite being heckled, mocked and threatened. In 1807, his efforts paid off. The Abolition of the Slave Trade Act was passed. But England didn't just ban slavery, we hunted it down and destroyed it.
They did.
The Royal Navy's West Africa Squadron spent 50 years intercepting slave ships, freeing over 150,000 slaves, and often fighting against the very nations still trading in human lives. This was one of the most expensive humanitarian missions in history, but England paid the price. Literally. Because England is charmingly bureaucratic, the government decided to compensate slave owners for their losses. Yes, even while doing the right thing, England had to be polite about it. The cost,
I mean, this is true.
The equivalent of £17 billion today. A loan so massive that British taxpayers only finished paying it off in 2015.
That's crazy.
And yet, despite all this, England is still the villain in every conversation about slavery. The Ottomans continued using slaves for decades. The French dragged their feet on abolition. And today, slavery still exists. Not in England, but in India, China, Africa, and the Middle East. Yet somehow nobody's demanding reparations from Saudi Arabia, or the descendants of African kings who sold.
Where in India does it? Because I react to like a lot of Indian content and like slavery. Where? How? No. I don't know about that fact. Somebody had to show me some evidence on that one, because in India, I don't think slavery existed in India. I have to see the source for this material, because. Yeah, I like I said, I react to India, and I react to a lot of content coming from about the country, and I don't think there's slavery no more in India.
Sold their own people. Historian Andrew Roberts put it best: no other nation in history has ever spent so much blood and treasure to end slavery, not just within its own borders, but across the entire world. But does anyone say thank you? So, to sum up, slavery existed.
I say thank you. I say thank you, dog.
Everywhere. England was one of the first to abolish it. We spent a fortune ending it worldwide, and if anyone disagrees, they're probably complaining in English, on the internet using laws and freedoms that England pioneered. Thank you, Squire.
I like this video. I like this guy.
Literacy, education, and cultural influence, or how England taught the world to read, think, and tell a proper story. Language is power, and no language has shaped the world quite like English. Once Latin ruled knowledge and French dictated diplomacy, but then English arrived. Rich, flexible, expressive, and utterly unstoppable. Today, whether you're sealing deals in Tokyo, coding in Silicon Valley, or debating in Oxford, you're doing it in English. And who do we have to thank for this? The storytellers, the playwrights, the dreamers. First there was Shakespeare, the man who practically invented modern storytelling, gifting the world with Hamlet, Macbeth, and a few hundred words and phrases people still use without realising. George Bernard Shaw put it best: Shakespeare is the happy hunting ground of all minds that have lost their balance. Then came Jane Austen, whose wit and social insight defined romance for centuries, and J.R.R. Tolkien, who sat in his study and created an entire world.
What started it? There must have been a point at which quite suddenly, like God, you chose to make the world like that.
I was going to use that illustration. Because, as I've said elsewhere, I think that if you wish to push me back into what semi-theological or philosophical, I think because being made by a creator, one of our natural faculties is wishing to create. But since we aren't creators, we have to sub-create. Let's say we have to rearrange the primary material in some particular form which pleases us, which it isn't necessarily a moral pleasing, it's partly aesthetic pleasing.
Then you make this distinction between what pleases aesthetically because it's balanced and what pleases morally. God, we may assume, made a moral rather than an aesthetic choice.
That
is this too great an assumption?
It's one that required a very long time to debate, but I should have thought that we are dealing with something which we're only looking at facets of one whole, but certainly an aesthetic whole is surely an aesthetic facet is as strongly to be predicated as a moral one.
With The Lord of the Rings, he didn't just write a story, he forged a legend. Without him, there would be no modern fantasy, no cinematic epics, and certainly no endless internet debates about elves and dwarves. Beyond literature, England's education system shaped the greatest minds of the modern age. Oxford and Cambridge have been producing world-changing intellects for over 800 years, and English schools became the blueprint for universities across the globe. Even those who claim to resist English culture still end up embracing it, from Shakespearean tragedy to Dickensian critique, from Hogwarts to Middle-earth. England's literary and intellectual legacy is inescapable. So, if you've ever read a novel, quoted Shakespeare, or found yourself lost in Middle-earth, then, my dear friends, you're welcome. The Agricultural Revolution, or How England Figured Out Farming and Accidentally Fed the World.
I feel like, England definitely did give the world so much in form of literature, so much in form of England. I mean, English, I don't know if it's the most spoken language in the world. I would say yeah, but I don't know the statistics, and I'm probably wrong. But there's so many deals across nations, across so many nations that do get done in English. I hate to be arrogant and say this is the most important language in the world, but I guess I'll say it's one of the most important languages in the world today that we speak, for sure. So again, England, you did give us English. They did give us literature. They did Shakespeare. I mean, facts. I mean, other countries had literature and stuff in different languages and created stories, and so it wasn't like they were the first storytellers on earth. So, but they did give us English, and they did give us a lot.
The Agricultural Revolution. Not exactly the stuff of grand speeches or glorious battles, but arguably one of the most world-changing things England ever did. For centuries, the average English peasant toiled from dawn to dusk, scratching out just enough food to not die. No tractors, no fridges, no efficiency, just endless labour and the constant threat of famine. And yet some people today throw around the term white privilege like our ancestors were lounging in mansions sipping tea. In reality, the vast majority were dirt poor, disease-ridden, and one bad harvest away from total ruin. But then England did what England does best. We started thinking, enter Jethro Tull, yes, like the band.
I feel like, yeah, he says that, but there are also a lot of Africans out there slaving away, poor, owned. There are also a lot of other different races. So I guess he's saying, like, you can't say whites were in the same boat as everybody else. I guess, but in a sense, they weren't really slaves. I guess in England. They might have been in other parts of the world. I don't know. I get where he's going. We'll let him keep
1701, he invented the seed drill, which meant farmers could finally plant seeds properly, instead of flinging them around like idiots. This massively increased crop yields and, shockingly, helped stop people from starving. Then there was Charles Turnip Townsend, who realised that instead of destroying soil by planting the same crops over and over, rotating them could keep the land fertile and boost food production. Revolutionary. And let's not forget Robert Bakewell, the man who basically invented selective breeding. Instead of letting livestock reproduce at random like drunk teenagers, he bred the biggest, strongest animals, leading to fatter cows, tastier pigs, and more food for everyone. Well, except the animals. These innovations completely transformed farming. Suddenly, England wasn't just barely surviving, we were feeding entire populations. And because we're nice like that, we exported these ideas across the world where other nations promptly copied them and acted like they thought of it first. Historian Mark Overton called it the most remarkable transformation of farming in human history. And he was right. Of course, it wasn't all good news. The Enclosure Acts reorganised land, making farming more efficient, but also forced thousands of rural workers into cities, where they became factory labourers in the Industrial Revolution. Imagine being a 12-year-old orphan, working 14-hour shifts in a soot-covered factory, coughing up your lungs only to be told centuries later that you were actually privileged.
14 hours. I guess it's a white privilege, not in the sense that, hey, these kids, and then I think when it comes to like, I don't think it's a race thing. I think it's a class thing. To me, I think it's, a lot of people turn it into race, but I think there are a lot of poor whites, as well, poor every other race. So I think at the end of the day, it becomes a class thing, and I think it turns into race because there are more rich whites than rich any other race. And so that's why people are like white privilege, this and that. But yeah, to me, it's more about class than race.
This suffering built the modern world. The food surpluses from the agricultural revolution fueled population growth, industrial progress, and medical advancements. Without it, society would still be trapped in the endless cycle of famine and survival. So next time someone whines about how privileged the English were, just remind them our ancestors were breaking their backs in fields, living in squalor and working themselves to the bone so that the world could eat. And if anyone's still unimpressed, they can try living without modern agriculture and see how long they last. What would you lot do without us?
What would you like?
The rule of law, or how England invented the idea that kings shouldn't do whatever the hell they want. The Magna Carta, the document that changed history, mainly because a bunch of angry English barons got fed up with King John being a complete pillock. In 1215, after years of John taxing everyone into oblivion, losing wars he probably shouldn't have started, and generally being a royal disaster, England's nobles decided they'd had enough. They cornered him at Runnymede, shoved a document under his nose, and essentially said, "Sign this or else." And just like that, the divine right of kings took a serious hit. Now, to be fair, the Magna Carta wasn't an immediate victory for democracy. John, being a slippery little weasel, tried to wriggle out of it the moment the ink dried.
Of course he did.
But the idea had been planted. Even the king wasn't above the law. Historian Winston Churchill, before he bankrupted Britain, called it the foundation of principles that have sustained freedom and justice. Of course, the French, being French, took a different approach to limiting royal power. They waited another 600 years, then solved the problem with a guillotine. But England, ever the civilised lot, preferred a well-worded contract. The Magna Carta paved the way for common law, trial by jury, and eventually parliamentary democracy. America even nicked the idea when writing its own constitution, and today, its influence can be seen in legal systems worldwide. Yeah. So, to sum up, England invented the modern concept of law and justice, and the rest of the world copied us. You're welcome.
Agreed.
Oh.
Dang, I mean, England has done a ton. As much as I feel like the world loves to hate on England and some of the dark things about England's past, they have done a ton for the world as well. So it's like, it can't all be hate. It can't all... of course, they have done dark things. I feel like so many nations have done dark things in their past. But I guess England gets called out the most because, in a sense, it was the most successful empire to ever exist. And so, to be the most successful, you would have had to do a lot of dirt. You would have had to do a lot of dark things. You have to do a lot of bad things. And that's just the given fact. But they also gave the world so much in their reign. Over time, throughout history, they have given the world so much that are essential to our daily lives today. So you can't just give them pure hate without realizing all the great things they've done for the world.
Or the British Empire. The empire so big that the sun never set on it. Mostly because England had taken so much land that the sun physically couldn't escape. But how did this little island full of tea-drinking, rain-soaked, slightly grumpy people end up ruling a quarter of the planet?
That's
well,
crazy.
like all
A quarter
good
of
English
the planet.
things, the empire started almost by accident. Back in the late 16th century, Spain and Portugal were busy grabbing land left, right and centre, filling their coffers with gold and generally annoying England in the process. Enter Sir Francis Drake, a man who was technically a pirate, but since he stole for England, we just called him an explorer. He sailed around the world,
Since he stole for England, we just called him an explorer.
nicked Spanish treasure, and helped England establish itself as a force to be reckoned with. And the Queen loved it. Elizabeth
I bet
I,
she
being the
did.
wonderfully bold and slightly terrifying woman that she was, thought, if the Spanish and Portuguese can have an empire, why the bloody hell can't we? And so, England embarked on the most ambitious real estate project in history. By the 18th and 19th centuries, England was running a quarter of the world's population and most of the planet's trade. India, Canada, Australia, chunks of Africa, the Caribbean, the Middle East. You name it, England had a hand in it. And no, not everyone asked for it, but details. Now, before people start clutching their pearls, let's get something straight. The empire wasn't just about taking over and bossing people around. Though, let's be honest, the English are exceptionally good at that. It fundamentally changed the modern world. It was England that created the global trade network, introducing everything from tea and railways to cricket and bureaucracy. It was England that spread the English language, which, let's be real, has saved millions from the horror of trying to conduct international business in German.
Schweizer Fernsehen, Rundschau.
Ja,
Ich komme aus Deutschland.
das merkt man gut.
Yes, there were problems. Yes, some parts of the empire were a bit heavy-handed.
Yeah.
But the fact remains the world as we know it would not exist without England's empire. Just ask Niall Ferguson, the historian who said, more than any other, the British Empire changed the world's trajectory, bringing law, commerce and order. Or take it from Indian historian Nirad Chowdhury, who admitted, had it not been for the English, India would still be a collection of feuding princely states. And then we get to the final act, the downfall. You see, the problem with building the biggest empire in history is that eventually you have to pay for it. And nothing kills an empire faster than war. By the time World War II rolled around, England was already stretched thin, and then along came Winston Churchill. Now, Winston Churchill, a man who could barely function without a bottle of brandy in one hand and a cigar in the other, was, for some reason, hailed as the saviour of Britain.
Fact.
Never mind that he bungled military strategies left, right and centre, or that he plunged England into irrecoverable debt, ensuring that the empire would collapse faster than one of his drunken speeches. By the time he'd finished recklessly throwing money at World War II, England was completely, utterly skint, bankrupt, in the red, owned by the Americans. We weren't just broke, we were...
I was going to say World War II, that's when America got rich, bro. That's when they started stacking cash.
Practically a glorified US client state, forced to beg for loans from the very people we had once ruled over. And when you're that deep in debt, you can't exactly keep an empire running.
No.
India got its independence in 1947, followed by most of the empire over the next few decades.
Yeah.
The final symbolic moment came in 1997, when England handed Hong Kong back to China, which, looking at China now, might have been a questionable decision. So, was the British Empire perfect? Of course not. Did England make mistakes? Absolutely. But did England shape the modern world more than any other nation in history?
Yeah.
Yes, it did. You're welcome.
I completely agree with the video. Yeah, England, I mean, without England, the world would not be the world. The world we live in today would not be the world we live in today. I don't know what it would look like, but it wouldn't look like the one that we live in today. So you got to give the big props to England for everything that they've done. You got to give them a big shout out. And like I said, it can't just be pure hate. You can hate them a little bit because, like I said, they did some dark things, but they also did a lot of good for the world. Y'all let me know what y'all think in the comment section. Love to hear from you. If you enjoyed, please don't forget to subscribe, give the video a thumbs up, and check out the next one. I'll see y'all next time.